And we are live. Okay. I'm very. I mean, this is wow. Okay. I should let me rewind. This is a Dawes Center for the Arts production. We are the Dawes Center for the Arts is a nonprofit in Pomona, California. This is part of our signature speaker series. We're an art gallery as well as an art lab, and we focus on bringing out the best in people and having their spirits emerge from their bodies. Apparently, I don't know what these emotions mean, but we are joined this hour by the great novelist, essayist, poet, um, professor, workshop leader, Luis Alberto Urrea, and I could not be more thrilled. I could not be more honored. I could not be more shocked that he is joining us this hour. I want to begin this story in the beginning.
All right.
So much of your writing is really just really very obvious and apparent, or to me anyways, that you kind of exude the spirit that really speaks to your past. So you were born in Tijuana, you're raised in San Diego, and you kind of have this life going back and forth. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, I was born in Tijuana on the road to the dog track of Aguascalientes Boulevard in a little clinic upstairs from a botica that's still there. You can still, you go down to the end of Revolution and turn left, which is nice. That's like a line about your own work, go down the Revolution and then turn left. Our family had a house in Colonia Independencia, on the street Rampa Independencia, and my dad had fled Mexico. He was a military guy, and he got in some trouble with the army, and so he came to Tijuana, where my grandparents had homesteaded, and my mom was American, just back from World War II, or not just back, but back about 10 years from World War II. And I came along, and I had my Tijuana boyhood. I spoke Spanish before I spoke English, and I thought that the most sacred people in the world were Mexicanos, especially Mexicanas, because I was mostly around the women. My dad wasn't around a whole lot because he went to work. And my mom wasn't around because she went to work. So I was with my grandma and my tia and my other tia, and whatever dishwashing girl they been mistreated, and my cousins Hugo and Margarita. And that was it. And Tijuana was amazing. We had a dirt street, and the tortilleria down the street, and it was a very I think almost a much different generations Tijuana than the one that everybody else got to know. And then I had tuberculosis. The barrio was being eaten up by tuberculosis, and my parents moved to San Diego partially to get me out of the ambiente, and we lived in Barrio Logan, made famous by so many poets and writers. Juan Felipe Herrera, he lived at the other end of Barrio Logan when I was a boy. I didn't know him, on National Avenue. And I joke in talks that we left Tijuana, went to Barrio Logan, which was Diet Tijuana. It was just all pura mexicana,
Yeah. Before you go on, I grew up. I was born in El Sereno, so I was born in kind of like a general milieu of the East Side, just a little section of the East Side.
Yeah.
And every time I go to Tijuana, I just think that like the amount of Spanish versus English spoken here, it's like a 60-40 split in Tijuana versus the 40-60 where I'm used to. The amount of English, because Tijuana is a border town, so there's a lot of English. And
a
lot of the currency of the dollar, and so it's like, okay, this is slightly more Spanish than I'm used to, and slightly more what do you call it, billboards in Spanish that I'm used to.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm used to a little bit more English and a little bit less Spanish, but it's not that different.
Yeah, Logan, and I was between Logan and National City, which was a little south, and then back and forth to Tijuana. So you talk about 60-40, that was kind of my boyhood, 60% US, 40% Tijuana, mostly Mexicans, and or Chicanos. There were like late stage Pachucos still around back then. Those guys that looked so dapper with the hats, all these Eddie Olmos types, and And then at the end of fourth grade, we moved up to an Anglo neighborhood, a white working class suburb. I talk about this a lot because it was the first time in my life I was with my mom's people.
Mm.
I never knew my North American relatives. Never. It was just my mom y puros mexicanos. And then we got to this neighborhood where I suddenly found out that we were not as good as the white guys. And I thought, pues mírale, I'm white, man. What's going on? But I had my Tijuana accent and I had this name they didn't like. And they started calling me Beaner and Wetback and, Pepper Belly and Taco Bender. That's a good California one. I had
Pepper
no
belly.
idea. Huh?
Pepper belly.
Pepper Belly. Yeah, that's an old one.
Oh man.
I'm dating myself
You're
right
aging
now,
yourself
bro.
on that one. Yeah, pepper belly. That was an art relic of the past. I luckily I ducked pepper belly. That one.
Yeah. Oh well, you were lucky.
One of the lucky ones. Yeah.
Yeah, you were lucky. But it was a shock to me that everything that I held sacred was suddenly trash.
Yeah.
Everybody that I worshipped was subhuman. What? And I watched my dad. I've talked about this often, but my dad went from being Don Alberto, very proud, the most Mexican that there ever was, to now he was Al the janitor. You know what I mean? And they Al, and I saw him diminish. I saw him wither, and it broke my heart. And I think to try to survive, I skewed over to my mom. I suddenly sounded like an American lad, I didn't have my Tijuana accent anymore. And it took a little while for me I felt like I was exploded. And then I reatomized. And part of that was being the first to go to college, but also, running into raza. Where I lived in Claremont, there weren't Chicanos, there weren't Mexicanos. All of a sudden in college, Alurista was there.
Yeah.
Remember Alurista, the great poet? Yeah, and I was people in college recognized Luis Alberto Urrea as maybe a Latino name. Hey, maybe this guy's Mexican. And so it was a reintegration, and that was a great gift to me. I was raised, I don't know what it was like in your generation, but when I was coming up in Southern California, there were no Latino, Latinx, I guess we call it now, certainly not Mexican authors or poets. Nothing. There was Don Quixote, but the teachers talked about it as Don Quixote. Right. So I used to tell people, I used to think it was about a donkey named Hody because I didn't know what they were talking about. And we get to college and suddenly there it was, Carlos Fuentes, Neruda, Gabriela Mistral, Octavio Paz, Garcia Marquez, Borges. It blew my mind. And at that same time, my half brother, who worked for Mexicana Airlines, could fly free to San Diego, to Tijuana, then he'd come to San Diego, and he would bring me records. And for the first time, I was hearing all of this music that I didn't know existed. Juan Manuel Serrat, Facundo Cabral, all these songwriters. And so it was this explosion, this reunification of my soul, which I felt had been tattered. And then when I was a senior, Alurista and his collective, publishing Maíz, notebooks of Chicano art and culture or something like that. He published my first poem. So it was a really interesting, circuitous journey. And I think the sorrow of the middle period then informed everything I wrote from then on, because I really wanted to honor, everybody from Rampa Independencia. I think that I didn't know it was a literature of witness I wanted to do, but that's what I wanted to do.
You mentioned they would call you a taco bender, and you mentioned your father going from Don Alberto to Al.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that in this country, like Mexican food, along with like Chinese food and Italian food, popular foods in the world, right? It's one of the big three staples that everyone loves, right?
Yeah.
So everyone loves Mexican food. Mexican food is great, and yet somehow our food becomes a detriment because it's associated with us, right?
Right. It's used as a weapon.
It's
How
weaponized
weird is
against
that,
us.
man?
And this question of hard work, right? The fact that we work hard, you can statistically look at it. Mexicans in Mexico work more hours than anybody else in the world. The Mexicans
Oh,
are,
it's incredible. And this
but hard
myth.
work is again weaponized against us. Can you speak to how like even our
Oh,
strengths are weaponized against us?
oh man, are you kidding me? You know, the myth that used to drive me insane is the sleeping Mexican. The pinche Mexicano asleep under a cactus. I used to think, wow, what the heck, man? Who sleeps under a cactus? Eating on a saguaro. But that's always been the case, and it always drove me crazy. And it was something of great importance to my dad. My mom, not so much, because my mom was kind of a blue blood from New York, you know. I think she found my father quite exotic when she married him, you know. But my dad had been a very poor boy from Sinaloa. He'd been a silver miner at the age of 13, right? And you know, he was in a rough situation, and he joined the army because he had to in Mexico. And the Mexican army promoted him because he looked like a gringo, and they wanted to have officers they could send to the United States who we were so racist here that they wouldn't even deal with Mexican politicians. And my father had this experience that he was with the president of Mexico on a trip to Texas, and they wouldn't serve the president of Mexico in a restaurant. And they told him, "You can eat, you're a white man, but he's not coming in here." And he's like, "This is the president of Mexico." They didn't care. And so that story always obsessed my dad. And you know, he would teach me all the time. Do you know that a worker is as much of a gentleman as you are? A woman who cleans your clothes or your table is as much of a fine lady as your own mother. And he used to tell me, you always call that gentleman maestro, speak to him with usted, because there's no one anywhere in Mexico beneath you. I thought, wow, Dad. And, you know, the outcome of some of this, which I have also talked about, anybody listening has probably heard me if they've seen me, but my dad worked in bowling alleys. And I spent my boyhood hanging out in the back of the bowling alleys, playing in the Brunswick machines and all that stuff, you know. And when I was in college, he ended up getting a job in the North County, San Diego, at a bowling alley I won't name. And he told me the first time in my life, "No vengas, no quiero verte ahí." I said, "Dad, come on, man. I've gone to every bowling alley. I visit you." And he said, "Do not visit me here. I don't want you to visit me here." And I went against his wishes. And I went to the bowling alley to see him. And there's a scene in a book of mine called Into the Beautiful North when a gentleman comes out of the women's bathroom at a bowling alley with a plastic bucket and a mop. And he's got rubber gloves on, and he's startled that people have come to find him. That was my father. That was the exact moment when I went to see my dad, and he came out of the women's room, and he had a bucket and a mop, rubber gloves, and he had a bag of all the things you get out of the bins and toilet stuff in the back. And he stopped and he looked at me, and he kind of froze and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Apá, I came to see you." He said, "Te dije que no, not here." And you could hear the boss calling him out. "Hey, Al, get back to work." And my dad says, "I'm a Mexican time boss." Get out of here, go. And so I was a little frozen in shock, right? And the boss comes out. And I swear to you, like I was what, 19? The guy was one of the football stars from my high school, my exact age. And he comes out, big old boy, lovely guy, you know, big white boy quarterback. And he looks at me and he says, he called me Louie. "Louie, what are you doing here, man?" And I said, "I'm here to see my dad." And he looks at my dad, who now is turning purple with shame. And he says, "Al is your dad?" And I said, "Yeah, man." And this guy reaches over and pats my father on the head. My father's only 5'7", pats him on the head. He says, "You tell Al he's a good little worker, all right?" And he goes walking back in his office. And my father he didn't cry, but he could have. And I cried. I was so ashamed that I had put him in that situation. But I didn't know that one could be ashamed of their work, right? But that was the moment. He had gone too far down the slide that he couldn't stop. And I've never forgotten that. Obviously, it showed up in a novel, fictionalized, but it's one of those moments that haunts me totally.
Yeah. Jeez. Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful because, you know, like you're telling me this story. I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but you know, you're such a tremendous storyteller that now I'm thinking about my own life and I'm thinking about my own similar experiences. And
Right?
that but that's a testament. And I'm not gonna tell them right now because it's about you, not me. I'm not gonna cry. But
It is
but
macho.
that's a testament. That's not yeah, a little bit. A little bit. I mean, like, okay, one little thing. This guy told me, like, why you capitalize your letters? That's too masculine. I was like, what? Too masculine? Like, you know, like you question my masculinity. This guy was masculinity. This guy was interviewing me, asking me why I capitalized letters, saying it was too masculine. And I was like,
Wow.
anyways, that's another story from another time. But you are such an incredible writer and you're such an incredible storyteller that, you know, you tell that story, but your story is our story. You know what I mean? I don't have an exact similar story, but I mean, I remember working and being like embarrassed, and I was thinking about, like, what would my grandfather do, you know, how if he saw me like this, and what would, you know what I mean, like, oh, I
Yeah.
need to walk out of here, I need to leave, but I need this check. And then it's like being caught in that thing where I'm you know, people are trying to reduce me, you know, somehow, you know, just somehow, some way, in labor. And you know, you're talking about your father being subject to that, and seeing that, and your story is our story. I mean, that story is our story, even if the exact thing didn't happen. It speaks to what happens to us as a community.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I feel like we're a family. A lot of times people don't understand that. Um, Spanish or any connection that takes you to those things. We have things that are sacred to us, not religious necessarily, but sacred. And a lot of times, especially because the NEA, they've been using books of mine for the big read for 7 years or something. But every year I go to places where whole cities or whole school districts have read something. And what's turned into an interesting thing is that they bring our kids to me. And they'll often tell me, don't worry, we didn't bring those ones. And I said, which ones? I say, the ones on probation, the trouble ones. I said, those are the kids I grew up with, man. Bring them. That's who I want to talk to. And yeah, when they walk in and they look at me and they're like, yes, the garacho, and you can see them, what's up with this guy? But I always greet the audience in Spanish, every gig, always. And I always own Tijuana. I always say Tijuana in the house. And I start talking to those kids, and I realize, especially now in the age of the Great Wall of our great Nero, our kids are scared, man, and they're hopeless, and they're embarrassed and ashamed and afraid, and a lot of them aren't documented. They don't know if ICE is going to show up there. So I try to start talking about our story, and there are so many things that people from the outside can't figure out. They can't know that this is sacred. And of course, the kids nowadays, they've never even seen handmade tortillas. Everybody, it's a machine or a press, but everybody knows. And when I start talking about tortillas, you can see them laugh at first, and then they start to soften, because I ask them, how many times do you think this action has happened over the centuries, right? Over the millions of hands every morning doing this, starting out with the perfect food when it was born with the Maya 13,000 years ago. It's never stopped. And then I tell them, you know why? You know why this happens? Because every time that woman or that man did that, it was a prayer for you and your future. And you're blessed, man. And they, you can see the vatos be like, damn, man. They get choked up, but it's true that there are these things that we are asked to find less than or shameful or embarrassing that are in fact sacred and beautiful things, and they unite us, and I can't go to I cannot go to a Mexican restaurant or or any restaurant with a busboy or a waiter or whatever that is Latinx and not start speaking Spanish. And sometimes they look at me like, and I have to say, no, 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 I'm not migra, I'm just Mexicano. Oh, and this thing happens as soon as you can break through and communicate honestly with somebody with love. Let's face it, people need love, man. And you give them a little love, and it's like you've gone on a holiday and to church at the same time. That's the secret to me of writing and teaching, to reach out and take those hands. Because a lot of our people, a lot of our, especially our guys, they're not used to, they're not going to hold your hand. They're not going to get a hug. I talk at jails and stuff, and I tell them, you know why I do this? Because if I walk up to you, homie, and tell you I love you, how about a hug? You want to hit me. But if I show you I love you, you want to hug me instead. You got to do that.
So tell us about Vatos.
Vatos. Nice segue, Matt.
Yeah,
Vatos. Vatos is an interesting story. When I was a little guy, I wanted to be a priest. I thought that'd be the coolest thing. My dad didn't dig that, by the way. He didn't like priests. But I went to mass every day, and I was really interested in liturgical speech and sort of these patterns, these almost hypnotic patterns of life. So years later, after I had written a long time and done all kinds of work, I was hanging with my family. I have my half brothers, my siblings, and their kids. And some of the kids in the family were gang related, maybe. And one of the homies died. It was my nephew, whom I loved, Luis Ricardo. And I had gone to the funeral, and it was interesting because it was in a part of town, nice cemetery, but near gang activity neighborhoods. And as we went in toward the funeral, you could hear shooting, and there's a couple of shots popped off in the distance. And the homies who were there, you could tell first that they were carrying, and you could see them reach under the t-shirt and look to see if anything. And that caught my eye. I thought, wow, look at these tough boys, And I don't know if people still do this, but in those days, they would get the, like the Gothic lettering, in memory of Louis, there'd be everybody to have like a uniform for him. And that moved me, right? And we went inside, and I saw my brother, his dad, heartbroken. And I saw his brothers, heartbroken. And I looked around, and there were old guys, abuelitos in their old suits, everybody broken. And then this young Mexican preacher. And I was looking around, and I was thinking, so who's going to write a poem for my nephew? Nobody. And I thought, and who's going to write a poem for my brother? And who's going to write a poem for that guy? And who's going to write a poem for all of us? And it just haunted me, and it kept bothering me, and it turned into this prayer, this hymn to Vatos who will never be in a poem. And it kind of took on this incantatory Catholic Mass vibe. And it turned out to be this, for a time, kind of a ritualistic point in the readings. People wanted to hear Vatos. And, and I didn't publish it really. It just kept going around and around. And there's a photographer, a Chicano photographer from Tucson, Jose Galvez. And he was working on a book with Cinco Puntos Press in El Paso of photographs. And the publisher gave him my poem. They were like, whoa, can we use this as a text for the book? And I thought, how neat is that, right? So that's how it came to life in print. And it became posters. It was on a TV show. I don't remember which, one of those prison TV shows where a dude had Vatos. And that was really amazing. So it's just gone on. It's had a life of its own, but that's where Vatos came from.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, asking about Vatos was my segue into talking about poetry for those who We're jarred by that. It was my very spontaneous idea.
No, that was great. That was great.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate
yeah, no, good stuff.
Yeah. I'm learning this craft. There's a craft to this, and just like writing. Okay, so you mentioned earlier alurista. Can you talk? A wide cross section of people are going to see this. Not everyone is involved in politics. I mean, a lot of people. Not everyone is involved in world poetry.
Right.
Is watching this. So can you tell us a little bit about who alurista was and why he was so significant to the history of Chicano poetry and poetry in general?
Alurista, known by his real name, Alberto Urista, but he was smart and he made it into a kind of a bullfighter name, all one word, Alurista. And he became this really sort of symbolic figure, right, of the revolutionary intellectual multilingual poet. And he put his money where his mouth was, and he began this wonderful publication, Mais, and he championed unknown writers, and he furthered, the raza. It was 1977 when I first met him, so it was still very much Chicano blowout, Viva la Raza stuff, brown berets and stuff. But what fascinated me about him, he's from Mexico City. He's still out there, he's still publishing, but the level of experimentalism and fire in his work, and the absolute equality of Spanish and English. He was a resolute Spanish reader and scholar, and a gifted English scholar and writer. And so I was taken with this concept that was new to me at the time and still taboo, of code switching. I thought, wait, we can do that? And he did that, and he did it really well. But then he started kind of mutating. I mean, there was a point where he lost me because, yeah, he'd code switch, Spanish, English, caló. Oh, Spanish, English, and caló. Yeah, we got some slang going on. Okay. Wait a minute. Let's throw in some now what? Okay, Spanish, English, now what? Caló, now what? And then he started instead using Aztec pictoglyphs, codex. So it'd be like poem, a picture of a rabbit, poem. I'd think, okay, what? And then he just started getting experimental. And the book that I think blew my mind, because he was always dealing in political themes and was always dealing in ethnic themes and fighting racism and bigotry, So he had a book not titled Speak English, but Spick in Glyph, ? And so he took on all this sort of anti-Mexican stuff and had glyphs. I didn't know what he was doing, but I just thought, wow, this guy is actually a genius of some sort, But he was a mentoring presence early on, challenging and mentoring. And at that same time, shortly thereafter, I met Rodolfo Anaya. It was like meeting your godfather, So I felt like the community was there, and I was so thankful for it.
Right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned getting more into experimental style. I'm always taken back to this criticism that appeared in the New Yorker about the film Roma, and the criticism was that there was all these things happening that were not explained, and they're talking about kind of these kind of paramilitary fascist forces.
Yeah,
it wasn't explained well enough that these people were doing this and that, and it was that they were involved and what the context wasn't given, right? But the same guy that wrote this criticism that the context was not given to what was happening here, that the Mexicans were simply not explaining themselves, wrote a book on Jean-Luc Godard, right? Who, I mean, like, what are you talking about? And when you describe these things that Alurista did, it reminds me a lot of like Joyce, like Finnegan's Wake, or the film last year at Marienbad, which was based on a screenplay by Grier, and the work of Grier, which there's just no explanation of this stuff. So there's always this constant idea that the Mexicans should explain themselves if they want to get fancy. In the U.S., it bothers me. I don't know. Does it bother you? I guess that's the question.
Oh yeah. I get. You know what I get all the time?
What's that?
I like your book, but the Mexicans speak too much Spanish in it. Really? That's weird. And and I noticed it when I fought against from my first book, Across the Wire. It was a nonfiction book about Tijuana. And the New York publisher, that's the book that took 10 years. It took me 10 years to get it accepted. And I was told stuff like, nobody cares about starving Mexicans. And I'd say, that's why I want you to publish the book, to make people care. It's about poverty. Anyway, and they insisted on italicized Spanish. And I said, no, man, do you think people in Mexico speak differently when they speak so that you'll know that it's Spanish? It's just Spanish. And the only bad reviews I got were people saying, well, he thinks we're stupid. He italicizes too much Spanish. So I got my way thereafter and didn't italicize. But yeah, you get constant complaints of lack of explanation or people explaining you for yourself. And it happens less now, but I have had people at the book signing table suddenly tell me, you don't care about the sovereignty of our nation. I don't really. What? It's so bizarre. People find agendas where I don't know that there are any. Maybe there are. I don't know. I'm always shocked if because I just think it's a human story, and when there are parts in Spanish, I try to, within the context, make it very clear what's going on. There are very few places, I think, even if you didn't speak or read Spanish, you'd honestly be lost. And sometimes very nice, sincere book club ladies will tell me, I read your book with a Spanish-English dictionary and I still didn't find what the words were. And I said, it's because we're cussing our asses off. That's why.
Polite.
It's not in the dictionary.
It's not in the dictionary. I'm involved somewhat with some of the kind of fight for ethnic studies, and this word keeps appearing, which is rigor, right?
Oh, rigor, yes.
They want to make sure that we bring in new voices, but that none of the rigor is lost. And that is, that is so racially coded to say rigor, right? You're describing Alorista creating this poetry, which is, no less experimental than these highly rigorized texts.
Yes,
Very rigorous texts.
you're right. You're right. The rhetoricians, rigor as in rigor mortis, eh?
Well, speaking of ethnic studies, speaking of the fight to do it, why are you so hated in Tucson?
No, I'm not hated in Tucson, man. They think I'm Elvis in Tucson.
Why is it a unified school district?
Yeah, that's a different thing, man. Yeah, those guys, es que son cabrones, man.
Yeah.
So there came this moment when they banned all the books. And they weren't really banning books, they were banning Mexicans. The Mexican American Studies program, they took it down. And they took my books away, Sandra Cisneros, but they also took indigenous writers. Sherman Alexie was out. Ofelia Cepeda, who's Tohono O'odham, and this beautiful, beautiful nature poet, out. And they took Shakespeare away. They didn't want Raza reading The Tempest because it would foment anti-American sentiments. I was like, what are you talking about?
Shakespeare hated America.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Shakespeare was pissed about those.
Very anti-American.
I don't know. It was a really odd period. And I was taken by surprise, honestly. I was at the Tucson Book Festival, my home away from home, and I was stopped by a camera crew on my way to my reading. And they said, so Luis, what do you feel about your book being banned? I said, what book? What banning? Oh, the Devil's Highway has been banned. And I said, what? For what reason? And the reporter said, well, it's un-American, according to them, and it has Satanism in the title. And I said, wait a minute. I said, first of all, they teach it at the Border Patrol Academy. So if it's American enough for Border Patrol agents to study it, maybe you could read it. And I said, what are you talking about? It's a map destination. It's called the Devil's Highway on maps. Are you going to take devil or anything out of is Devil's Tower now just going to be called, Big Shapely Rock? It's
We
weird.
got to shut down Duke, you know?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't take it seriously. And by the next year, they had banned 6 of my books. So I was like
Yeah.
champion, man. I felt like I won some
That's what I
kind
was
of
gonna say. You were like the most banned. I mean,
I was the
everyone
most
banned
banned.
slave
Yeah,
injustice, but you were like the most banned.
I
Like you.
was. I was. It was crazy. And um it turned into all kinds of movements though that shut it down in a lot of ways. I mean, the guy who was behind it was also a racist blogger under a fake name, right? Anti-Mexican blogger. I think his name was Falcon 9 or some brilliant thing like that. And the book festival did everything in their power, including that next year in the height of the catastrophe, making me the MC.
Wow.
And I remember pulling Chicana and Chicano waiters out of and having them talk on the mic to these people, because all the people there were the power brokers. And afterwards, you have to love this, because I thanked from the podium the Unified School District, the Tucson Unified School District, and they stupidly started applauding and cheering that I had recognized them. And I said, because thanks to you, I'm selling so many more books. So thanks for that. And afterwards, I was coming out, and there was all kinds of, there were Chicano and Mexican writers there, and activists to giving hugs. And the woman who was their press secretary or whatever she was came up to me, and she said, I just can't believe you would do something that mean to us. And I said, really? I can't believe you would ban books from children. And I said, you were stupid enough to let it be videotaped. You can still find the tapes of them taking the books out of the kids' hands and the kids crying. And she said, it's not about books. It's about Mexicans. And everybody looked at her like this, and she realized what she said. She said, I mean, Mexican-American studies. But it was too late. I thought, no, you spoke the gospel truth, sister.
Yeah.
Not
Wow.
Mexican.
That's incredible. So you are
Yeah.
the 6-time band champion.
Woo!
You're like,
I know. I need a T-shirt, man.
yeah, like woo! You're like the Ric Flair of getting banned. You're
I'm
like
the Ric Flair
championship
of
winning
band
one.
authors.
Yeah. So I remember when the first time I actually met you in person was at the University of Puget Sound, and you were telling a story from the Devil's Highway, about these Anglo men who didn't realize you were Mexican, and they were kind of chattering away saying certain things. Did you recall this story?
That's happened so many times, man. That happens all the time. So I don't know that particular one, but yeah, I've had that happen a lot. And you find out that you're kind of a spy. You just listen. They don't, but that happens both ways. That happens both ways. I'm all often around Mexicanos who just think I'm a North American, so they start talking smack in Spanish, and I'm listening to them like, oh, So you have to mind yourself, because if you want to be honorable and straight up, but sometimes you just have to be sly and listen, because you pick up some juice.
All right, well, so what intelligence have you gathered, Agent Urrea? Like, what's going on?
Some of it's been pretty. One time I was on tour in Texas. I was in Laredo, and there was a lot of worry. It was around the time La Barbie got taken down. Remember that guy, the güero Chicano narco that was beheading people?
Oh,
So
yeah.
it was, yeah, he was. And I was hanging out with his old high school teacher, and she was like, oh, you'd love La Barbie. Go down to the prison and interview him. I was like, nah, I don't think so, man. But on the way home, you have to go to another town to go to take a plane. And it was sitting in the waiting area. It was all Mexicanos. And here was me, güerito dude, and I'm on my phone texting my wife, and these 2 men come in. And one of the guys was older, and he had white hair. And the other guy, total, Oliver Stone cliche of the crazy, dangerous Latino. Big dude, black t-shirt, shades, Santa Muerte tattoo on his arm. And they come in, and a black mustache, of course. And they came in and they're looking around and they see seats next to me and they go sit down next to me. So I was sitting there and they start talking. And the old guy is telling him in Spanish, you were supposed to kill that guy and you didn't do it. And now we've got to go back and explain how we didn't kill that guy. And he identified Zetas. And I was like, and I text my wife, I'm totally sitting next to two Zetas right now, and they're talking about a hit. I can't believe it. And I looked over there, and both of them were leaning over in their seats looking at me. And I thought, and I said, I tell her, I'm going to go find Starbucks, man. And I snuck out. And then I got on the plane and paranoia continued on the plane. But it's moments like that, you know, when you can hear somebody talking about stuff. And I used to say this because, you know, I got my start in the business of witness, you know, this doing relief work in Tijuana with the poor. My dad was killed in Mexico and when I was at senior college, and I wanted to do something more meaningful than try to get famous. And so I spent years in the Tijuana garbage dump and prisons and all this stuff, helping people. And I realized that because I went in as a translator, but I was doing, you know, hands-on work. But I realized that if you have the gift of speaking, you've earned the responsibility of listening. And I think part of the problem, look at our government, look at everybody, people don't listen, especially to those people, as we talked about at the beginning of our chat, that they look down on or they're condescending to. One of the problems with people who go help is, you know, they're helping with a mirror, right? They're seeing themselves being noble. And you can't look at yourself. You have to look at the person that si señor, si señora, speaking in usted, like my father told me, who just happens to have to pick garbage to stay alive. It wasn't a choice. It's just how life plays out for people. And so when I realized it was my responsibility to listen to them, you know, and they gave me the world. I mean, I owe them this writer's life, I realize now.
So you spoke about, kind of recovering yourself when we went to college, but I want to really get a little more into that, into what that looked like, or what the specifics in your life with that, because I'm hearing a story of, your little boy, Luis in Tijuana, and then you come to America, you're a teenager, and now you're Louis Albert trying to like emphasize yourself, and not bend your tacos too ethnically. And then now you're Don Luis Alberto, the Pulitzer Prize winning, the Harvard lecturing, the 6 times banned book champion. You come to all this. So what's that in between chapter when you go to college and you kind of reconnect to like to yourself, and you mentioned El Rizo, but what was that like to go from wanting to distance yourself from a Mexican identity, from a Chicano identity, to really to getting back to it, but through the vehicle of poetry, through the vehicle of writing and journalism and essay? How that happen?
It was funny. It was not necessarily trying to distance myself. It was my secret identity, man. In high school, I was Clark Kent, but at the nighttime when I had on my super suit, I was El Superman. That was my secret thing. I had this other thing it was precious to me. The time when I think I tried to escape the Mexicanness was when I was super tender, a little kid, 5th, 6th grade, junior high, where all of the attacks really hurt you. And then by the time I got to high school, especially, I was just a full-on wild thing. I mean, my dad had taken me to Sinaloa when I was 14 because he wanted to make me more Mexicano. He wasn't happy that I was un hippie. He was like, what is all this music you listen to? And cut your hair, man. You're wearing love beads, mijo, ¿qué es eso? And he took me to Sinaloa and he gave my cousins one rule: turn him into a man. And then my dad left. And he left me down there in Sinaloa. That was intense. And I came home. So it was just this tumult, of identity. But I think the main thing that happened for me in college was finding my identity as a writer. You know, you probably the same way. I always have a notebook, man. I've always had I was the guy in high school that had the notebook. You know, that kid that always had it. That was me. I couldn't play sports. I was too blind for that. I was a writer. I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't think people like us got to do it.
Yeah.
Right. I thought it was somebody else got that chance, but I couldn't stop myself.
Yeah.
So in college, yeah, the Mexican identity came flooding back, but also the burgeoning realization that I was in fact a writer. And the person who actually discovered me and trained me into it was Ursula Le Guin, the science fiction writer.
Wow.
Yeah, she took me in when when my father died. And she bought the story I wrote about my father's death, which was, you know, the only way I knew how to deal with it was try to write about this awful experience. And she bought it for an anthology. It was my first actual sale. And then she coached me into doing this stuff. So it was a double-edged sword in that way, in that the Mexicanness and the writerliness all came together into the thing that I actually was. I didn't know what I was. You know, you have those times when you don't know what you are.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have substances. I didn't drink much. I was terrified of drugs. My friends were all, you know, it was the 70s, man. I can't tell you how much marijuana I passed up.
Yeah.
Now I think, why did I pass all that marijuana up?
Never inhaled. Never inhaled.
I never touched it. I've never taken drugs yet. It's so weird. I'm ready now. I'm like, yeah.
Quarantine. Why not? I mean, if not now, then when?
Hey, it's legal now. Give me some pot brownies, man.
So again, this is going to be viewed by a wide cross section of people. For those who are not familiar with Ursula Le Guin, can you tell our audience a little bit about, you know, Ursula Le Guin?
Ursula K. Le Guin, one of the great American authors, recently died. She was famous as a science fiction writer, but she wrote a fantasy classic called the Earthsea Trilogy, which is still brilliant. She wrote a novel that everyone probably should read, especially in our culture now, called The Left Hand of Darkness, which is a science fiction story, but like many science fiction stories, a meditation on our own culture and situation. And that's an amazing story that takes on gender in a fascinating way, and that the people of this planet we go to, they change genders a couple of times a year. So you're a male part of the year, and then you're not. And what does that mean? What does that mean to us? What does that mean to their culture? And it's an adventure story and quite brilliant. So she was a fantastic, brilliant woman, and very, very welcoming to me. She used to call me Luisito. I'd say, "Oh wow," you know. And when she came to be a visiting workshop leader, they brought her in, you know, part of a quarter, like they do at colleges. And my English writing professor took her this piece I wrote about my father's death. It's called Father Returns from the Mountain. And she told him, I want to meet him. So he told me, Le Guin wants to meet you. And I thought, what? She was a hero to me, you know. And so I went to her apartment. They got her in La Jolla. And I was just a kid. I hadn't met anybody famous yet, right? And there she was. She opened the door and she said, Luisito. And in those days, she smoked a pipe. Yeah. So she had a pipe, yeah, and she had a glass of whiskey. I thought, dude, you are the coolest person I've ever seen.
Yeah, seen. I have great expectations. Go on.
Yeah, and she brought me into her apartment, and she said, tell me about your father's death. And I remember I sat down, and I think I missed the couch because I sat on the floor. I was looking up at her in her chair, and I told her the whole story. And she said, well, I really like this piece, and I'd like to invite you into my workshop. And I thought, what? She said, yeah, you want to take it? And I said, I do. And she said, and I'd like to buy it. I said, buy what? She said, I'd like to buy your story. And she had it, a stapled mimeographed copy. And I was like, well, you've already got it. And she said, no, buy it for a publication. And I thought, Oh no, are you serious? And she did. It went into an anthology called Edges. Was my first sale. So, you know, and when it came out, it was back in the days when there were, you know, Walden Books and Pickwick Books and those little bookstores. And when the book came out, my homies and I went to the bookstore, and all of these guys bought one. It was $1.75 or something, you know, and they were standing at the checkout stand, and the first guy who bought one said, "Dude, you got to sign it." And I thought, "Whoa, really?" So I signed 6 books, man, and I thought, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Signing books, and I haven't stopped.
Yeah. No, you have not. No, you have not. And when reading your work, the thing that like it really reminds, the thing it most reminds me of is like reading kind of like, especially the nonfiction stuff. It reminds me so much of like, Eduardo Galeano, like this kind of,
Oh, wow.
yeah. I don't act so surprised. You know, what I mean,
No,
like,
come on,
I
man.
haven't checked your resume lately.
Dude, I'm just a suburban dad with a little stupid dog, man.
And I'm sure that he was just a suburban dad with a little.
Yeah, I probably was.
We're all just human beings. We're people here. Us people here work hard and try and develop our talents. And but no, that is actually honestly the person I would most be drawn to. Like, okay, this is like that. Because the reason I say that is because there's such a high level of lyricism. And I'm not reading a fictional story, right? So can you speak a little bit to why do you? Because there's such a in our minds this divide of like, okay, this is serious, so it has to be written in a serious tone because I'm describing something that really happened. Like lyricism is inappropriate; it must be right. But you bring lyricism to writing the stories of real people who live in real time with with real lives. Can you tell us why you make those decisions as a writer to really write out their lives so beautifully?
Well, this is a technical answer. It's the way I write. I mean, it's the way it's the way I see the world. It's the way I function in the world, and it's the way they experience the world, because people have lyrical experiences, if that's what it is I do. You know, I think that there's a lot going on in our experience, in our seeing, in our feeling about it, but also as a composer. Because let's face it, we're composing. So I'm not a robot. I'm not a 7-Eleven surveillance camera that's just going to play back the tape. It goes through me. And so part of what I'm doing is composing, right? I want to make, this sounds pretentious, but I want to make art. And so it's important to me to give the reader the experience through the book, to experience it fully as best as I can get to it, and to honor the people that I'm telling the story of as best I can. And my books often, even Devil's Highway, which is to me kind of a hell book, but there's a lot of humor in it because people are funny. Mexicanos are incredibly funny. Border Patrol agents are funny, and even the coyotes and the narcos, they're funny, unless they're punishing you. And so that's all part of the ambiance. But also as a composer, you are asking people who are maybe not necessarily sympathetic to the illegal to understand the plight of somebody who's trying to survive, trying to feed their family, trying to just for a minute get enough money to take care of their wife and children back home. And people who go through that experience are not the people who are buying that book at the overinflated price, wherever it was published at, and reading it, but there are people who need to know that story and feel it. And so as a composer, say you're composing music, you can use the lyrical, poetic, comedic, ironic, wry, even Edward Abbey nature writing kind of parts of it to get a reader to the place where they can then fall off the cliff into the utter horror of what they're going to experience. You have softened them, but you've also sort of indoctrinated them You've made them bond with these men who they would probably have never even spoken to, these lost men. And then you drop them into the suffering. I'm never funny about the suffering. But if you're not sadistic, you can use the lyricism to try to pull the reader back out too. Now I've got to say, once I dropped the readers off the edge in that book, I didn't necessarily want them to then feel like, oh, it's really nice and let's feel cuddly. You know, the tragedy was real, and I wanted them to feel the tragedy all the way out. The part of that book that I detest, and I hated it at the time, was the editors made me add data, numbers, you know, sort of a wrap up. And the editor, who's a dear friend of mine, but he said, you got to ask yourself, who cares? And I said, I just spent 200 pages. If you don't care by the end of that, giving you percents and numbers and projections is not going to make anybody care. But they did. And I said, I promise you, in 6 months after releasing this book, these numbers are going to be out of date. It always changes. You know, if I had my way, there wouldn't be any that kind of data dump at the end of the book. And we did do a 10-year anniversary edition. And I added a personal essay because I tried to make it not about me, but other things. But I figured after 10 years, you know, a lot of people had read it. I could talk about my own experience as well. And that was felt to me like a better way to end the book than, you know, a bunch of added on numbers and things. But that's why it's story first for me.
Yeah.
Story
So
first.
another piece of covering similar or covering the same topic, piece of grotesque fiction came out late last year called American Dirt, and you were actually
Oh God!
you actually
Don't do this to me, Matt.
But you were, no, I don't want to talk about the book, but you were involved in some of the radio appearances talking about like that what we need to do going forward, how we need to have better representation, more representation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that book's a little vexing to me.
Yeah.
I only did one appearance. I refused all appearances. I wouldn't do it.
We won't make this one a one.
No, but this is interesting. I mean, I did Maria Hinojosa's show.
Yeah.
And I told her straight up, you know, and she asked me about a certain scene, and I said, that's on page 57 of my book, By the Lake of Sleeping Children. So, you know, I have a lot of issues with that whole scene, but the general protest movement around it has been fascinating, you know, and it's brought a lot of dear friends into my life. Miriam Gurba, it's a wild woman, and I adore her, you know. So yeah, I just think if you're going to write a book about other people, one of the issues people were angry about on the other side, on the Trumpy side, were like, you just don't want people who aren't Mexicans writing about Mexicans, and you can write about anything you want. I said, no, yeah, you can, but don't make people into an inaccurate cartoon.
Yeah.
Don't be insulting and stupid about it. You know, this is about people who are people.
Right.
You can't make them into a cartoon just so you can sell 1 million books.
You know, and in the same time frame, there was an Anglo woman. I can't remember. I apologize. I can't remember her name right now. But she went down to Mexico and she did all this archaeological research to uncover the lives of the Aztecs, right? And it was widely celebrated. Everyone loved it. It was like you got these like, you know, little details and nuances about people's lives that were kind of, you know, speculated upon because we can't know for 100% certainty. But it gave a larger view of Aztec life. And you know, she was white, American. Nobody cared because you know it wasn't humanizing. Nobody cared. Everyone applauded. Thank you. You know, there was no like uproar. There was no like take this down, Oprah. There was no like so it yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, Malcolm Lowry wrote beautifully about Mexico, you know. B. Traven, that guy was a German, for God's sake. That's not the issue, you know, it's what you do. There's a friend of mine who's a really good critic named David Schmidt. And if anybody wants to find out some fairly reasoned arguments about that book, David Schmidt, SCHMIDT, he's worth reading for rigor. But you know, he makes some amazing points about what would you do if somebody who came from Hong Kong, say, and had never been to the United States and visited Disneyland, went back to Hong Kong and wrote the definitive novel about, Chicano crime in East LA. And then he gave examples that were absolutely insane, but you realize they were as insane as the examples that people complained about in this other book.
Yeah, 100%. Like, absolute agreement. So I think that the one thing I really want to talk about is less that book, more of a jumping off point, is that I think that our community faces like these kind of twin evils, and that they're or these twin oppressions that we're kind of in terms of expressing ourselves. And one is misrepresentation, the other one's underrepresentation. And like I like to simultaneously fight those. You've managed to do that as an individual. Others have managed it as individuals, but as a community, we are so underrepresented, and to get through the gates, we have to misrepresent. It's a how do we fight this? How do we overcome this?
What do they say in recovery programs? Keep coming back. It works if you work it. Isn't that what? We just keep toiling. We get better and better. Some of us, realize that our ancestors, remember when they used to tell you, you got to be better to just be good enough?
Yeah.
That was exhausting, man. But maybe it's true. I don't know. But you know what? The numbers are going to win out also. There are more and more of us here. There's certainly, the generations of people who are university people. Even in my family, I have nephews and nieces who are PhDs now. You think, wow, this is amazing. People who read, people who produce. We are there. I've had a really odd experience, for example, with Hollywood. Hollywood has bought a bunch of my stuff. They've never filmed any, but they want to keep paying me. I'll take the money. But I've got this last novel, The House of Broken Angels. We've sold it to Hulu, and it's actually apparently going to get made.
Yeah.
And I think this is a way when we get the representation, we show up, and post Trump era, whether you like Trump or not, I think there's going to be a different vibe. There's going to be a bit of an opening.
Yeah.
Some people fear it. A lot of us celebrate it, but we're here, and there are brilliant, wonderful writers. Like I mentioned, Gurba, she's amazing. Jean Guerrero. There's so many of us doing the work. Maria Hinojosa has a new book coming out. I'm working on a book that hardly has any Mexicans in it, so we're going to be shocked. Then I'm going to have to deal with, they're going to be like, oh, you sold out, homie. I said, no, it's just a different story. We can tell all kinds of stories. We need to.
I absolutely agree. I want to take a question from the audience.
Okay.
Question from the audience. This is kind of set up weird because the question just lost. You got 3 questions from David Romero, but he only gets 1.
Okay.
I can't see what happened to it, but I'm gonna have to. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to paraphrase this. He says that so much of your work so much of your work is based upon all this research that you have to do in order to write it. When did you when did you learn that you had a love of research? Does it emerge from your life, or is it just some weird quality about you?
I hate research. You know what? I was such a bad student, and honest to God, if you're doing a book that has a lot of research involved in it, it's like the world's worst English assignment. So Hummingbird's Daughter, for example, took me 26 years of work.
Yeah.
And if you had told me that at the beginning, I wouldn't have done it. But I was compelled because it was the story of my tia, and I wanted, all the things we've talked about. I wanted to get it out there. Devil's Highway, I turned it down at first when the editor first contacted me. He contacted me. I didn't go to them with this. He called me and he said, "You want to do this book?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, because, I've got all these border books already. Am I going to have to write a border book a year forever? And I don't feel like I have the place to tell the story of so many lives lost. It's too." And I said, and I don't think I feel comfortable trying to get involved with the Border Patrol.
Yeah.
And he said to me, which was a brilliant response from an editor, okay, that's fine. But I have one question. Do you trust anybody else to do it? And I said, oh, hell no. He said, right? Exactly. So a lot of times you just don't know. You don't know that it's going to take research. Sometimes just living is the research. House of Broken Angels, was inspired by my brother's death. You can't do more painful research than that. But I thank God every day that I did it, because it's a very alive book. So I don't like it, but I do like parts of it. This new book I'm writing is a novel about my mother's experience in World War II. And she was in the most forward female group in combat in World War II, accidentally. And all of the women from that are gone except one. And she lives about 2 hours from my house. She's 102 now, was my mother's best friend and her truck driver. And so to have had years with her, met her when she was 94, has been one of the coolest things of my whole life. So those things about research are great. Finding stuff or feeling like you can get the record straight, and you have to be careful, because, books that we talked about in this interview that I have problems with, they were researched, but it depends on the researcher. You know what I mean?
That's with most things. It depends on the person with the ER behind the adjective, the verb. The learner, the research, the writer. Wow, so this has been really incredible. I thank you so much for your time. We're coming up with a little over an hour, so I don't want to take too much more of it. But I do. You've been extremely supportive of other writers throughout the years. I hear stories of it. I can speak to my own experience with it. It's you are incredibly supportive. You have, to me, you are, just in your personality, you are a role model of how I would want to be. I mean, the relationship you have with your success, you have like a love affair with your career and the things that happen. You're constantly happy and engaged with it. You don't have any air pretense. I mean, you're really quite an amazing person. The question that came from David Romero, he's actually going to be published by Flower Song Press in the near future. I'm carried on Flower Song. You wrote a foreword for one of our authors, or one of the authors. I don't know. Are they my press mates? Is that what I say? My I don't know what
Yeah,
they're
maybe
called.
your press mate.
Yeah, my press mates. All right, you wrote a foreword for one of the authors of Flower Song. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. I mean, Flower Song, man, that's like, they take me back to the old days. They move me so much. I was trying to promote them as much as I could on social media, and telling people you gotta support these people, because that to me is what it's about, is people with a dream, not careerist. I mean, obviously I enjoy a paycheck, but not fueled by sheer capitalistic greed, but people who want to get something done, people who want to help each other work. Back in the day, certainly in the Chicano movement, people would throw together a press in their garage, dude, if they had to, and they would print their homies' books. And I love that. I want to bring back the Pinto poets. Remember those? People are always helping inmates publish collections, and that's important. We die of starvation if we're silenced. And so, yeah, it means a lot to me. There's a lot of love, and yeah, that book, Grise's book, I love her, and I love what she's doing, and she came at me the right way. I had posted once years ago on social media that at a time when there was so much anti-Juarez stuff going on, I said, wouldn't it be cool if a bunch of us rented a plane with one of those banners and fly up and down the border and just have it say Amor para Juarez all day long? And she wrote to me and she said, Luis, you magnificent bastard. And I thought, she's my friend for sure.
That's a fantastic story.
Yeah. We're just, we're together on this journey, and I think we should take care of each other. I don't think there's time anymore for, untouchable superstars. No, especially now. We need to, we're all in quarantine together, I'm doing stuff for the quarantine. I've got a thing on my Facebook page where it's turned into a crazy movement. I didn't mean for it to, but it did. But I think people know if you are open and you're welcoming and you've got it together and you're not scamming people, you know, they're ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you have any projects that you want people to know of? Any upcoming projects that are of interest? Jokes?
Just getting through the coronavirus, man.
The coronavirus?
No, I'm just working on my World War II book, and you know, I'm doing these weird internet appearances now.
Well, I'm so thrilled that you joined us. Yeah, we'll post for those who are really who are interested in getting Luis's work, who are or just watching this and reminding themselves that, oh my God, I don't have that one. I don't have that book. But we'll post a link below. We'll post it to your website. Um, okay, so no plugs. But
No.
how about some words of wisdom? Do you have some words of wisdom?
Oh, words of wisdom.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, I just what we've been saying, you know, just have faith. It's all story. We actually don't live in a place. We live in the story we tell ourselves about the place. You know, and you can dictate a lot of the details about your life by revising your story. You know, just keep going, man. Keep writing it. You dictate it. And read. I talk to young writers all the time, and it's weird, you know, grads and so forth, a lot of them don't read unless they have to. And I think, how can you be a great writer if you're not consuming like crazy, you know? And my last bit of advice is, don't be shy. Contact your heroes. That's what I did. Just drop them a line and say, I love you, man. See what happens.
I can't top that. Those are beautiful words.
Ah,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Luis.
thanks, brother.
I really appreciate you.